Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I am so excited to bring you the first of 3 videos covering my favorite books that I read in 2019. This one is going to cover the thrillers and horror books that I read that were actually new releases, so they came out in 2019. However, I have 2 more videos planned, one being about science fiction fantasy, as well as my final video, which will be covering the favorite backlist horror books. I have some great books to talk about here, and I do want to mention, of course, that this is very subjective. So if you look on Goodreads and look at my star ratings, they may not necessarily perfectly line up with the rankings I'm going to give you. I'm going to talk about my top 5 from number 5 up to my number 1 new release. And of course, I loved all of these books. And if I were to redo these rankings on a different day, they would probably end up in a slightly different order. But all that being said, let's get into the books. First, at number 5, we have The Whisper Man by Alex North, which is a thriller I have not actually talked about yet on my channel, but it definitely deserves its spot. This is about a small town where there was a serial killer that was known for whispering outside of his victims' windows before stealing away these children and murdering them. He has been caught and locked up. However, someone is now once again whispering outside of the windows of children, and a young boy has gone missing, is possibly murdered, and now the town is worried that there is a copycat or someone who is recreating these crimes. I love this book. It was just so creepy, and I think it's the kind of thriller that will appeal to people like myself that tend to prefer horror books, because this book kind of played on the lines between the possible and the impossible, and I just adored it. The writing was so well crafted and the story itself was well plotted. I didn't actually guess the ending, but I wasn't trying very hard. Instead, I just enjoyed where the story went. But I liked that when I was looking back, I could see that there were enough hints that if you wanted to, you could probably parse out who the killer was and what was happening. And I really like an author that takes the time to put those clues in, because it basically rewards really smart readers. And what I liked so much about this book, besides the creepiness, was the characters. This book centers around a father and his son, and the author is very honest in his portrayal of this father who is very uncomfortable in his role as a parent. And I really like books that do that. So many books are afraid to poke holes at parenthood or just show flawed parents. And this book very much avoided that common trope and instead showed a very real person. And I just love that story. So again, for the characters, the creepiness, the writing, this book really had it all. I definitely want to check out more by this author. Of course, I will be talking about this book in a future wrap-up, but if you can't tell, I very much enjoyed this book because it made my favorites. So if that's not a recommendation enough, I don't know what is. Now at number 4, we have Camp Slaughter by Sergio Gomez. This is a horror book that is about a group of teenagers that decide to go and party out in the woods in an isolated cabin. However, they are unaware that there are cannibals on the loose. And this story, if you're not familiar, made my favorite video this year that was all about the books that scared me. And this book honestly truly terrified me. If you just go ahead and read the prologue, you can understand why this book was ridiculously scary. I've said before that I don't need horror books to be scary in order to be good. However, when a book does manage to scare me, especially because I am a reader who reads so much of the genre that I am pretty desensitized, which probably isn't a good thing, but this book definitely hit home and just really punched me in the gut, and I just loved it. So it's gruesome and dark, but not only that does it have good characters and a really well plotted story. I like the fact that Sergio Gomez, who is of Mexican descent, brought his Hispanic heritage into the story with Hispanic characters as well. And the story is also told from multiple perspectives, including these people that are investigating this cabin and trying to figure out what is happening there. And I love a story that involves a perspective of skeptics. So there's so much to love here. This book was just solid. I really thought that it worked incredibly well and has a lot of cross appeal to people that read several different subgenres of horror. You'll find something that you're gonna like here, especially if you like something that's truly scary. Now at number 3, we have 12 Nights at Rotter House by J.W. Ocker. And this is a story of a journalist that decides to spend 13 nights in a supposedly haunted house. house in order to write his novel. And because he is a skeptic, he decides to invite along his childhood best friend. However, they have had a bit of a falling out and they aren't on the best terms when they are finally reunited. This book worked for me on so many levels. I've said before that I don't like haunted house stories, so I was pleasantly surprised that this one just worked incredibly well. And I think it's a fact that it's a haunted house story that is so incredibly aware of itself and is aware of the tropes of the genre. So because the main character basically knows that he is living out a supposedly non-fiction story of these fictional haunted house narratives, he goes in there and lets his cell phone die. He plays with a Ouija board and does all of these iconic haunted house things. And it just made for a really funny read. I found myself laughing out loud at several points, but at the same time, this book still managed to maintain a level of creepiness, which I did appreciate. It was just so meta, and there are so many pop culture references to haunted house movies, TV shows, books, etc. So if you were just a horror junkie and have read perhaps way too many haunted house stories, I have got to recommend this one. I think that it worked incredibly well and was just so much fun. I love that the main character again is a skeptic, and I really like that perspective because I see myself in that character. And while I was able to guess the ending, it didn't really take away from the story. It definitely was still a book that left me with this huge book hangover, and I struggled to pick up another book after finishing this one, which says a lot. So definitely recommend this one. So much fun. And yeah, it's definitely one I'll be rereading in the future. Now at number 2, we have Lock Every Door by Riley Sager, which yes, I am shocked that I have not only one, but 2 thrillers on this list, but this one definitely deserves its place. This is a story of a woman named Jules. She is down on her luck. She's quite poor. So she accepts a job working as a house sitter in a very well-to-do apartment in Manhattan. And there are a lot of strange rules around this house sitting job, but she is desperate, so she agrees. And this story, it's just so well done. I have said before that this book is reminiscent of Rosemary's Baby, which is definitely done on purpose. And because I've read Rosemary's Baby, this book worked even better for me than I think I would have without that previous knowledge. But the book still stands on its own. It's very much its own story, but at the same time, there's lots of nods and winks to that classic. You will be able to guess certain things about this book because you have a background with Rosemary's Baby, if that's the case. However, there were also things about the book that worked the opposite, because the author knew that people were going to go in with certain expectations. So he took those expectations and he subverted them in the best possible way. So I'm happy to say that while I was able to guess some of the twists and turns, the author totally played me, and there were definitely twists in this book that I did not see coming. Even if you are like me and are a little bit fatigued by the genre, this one is definitely the exception. It rises above the rest and is definitely my favorite thriller of the year. Finally, at number 1, maybe you guessed it and maybe you didn't, but I decided that it had to be this one. And that, of course, is Imaginary Friend by Chbosky, which is another one I did an individual review for. But this is a story of a mother and a young boy that moved to a new town to get a fresh start. The boy goes missing for 6 days, and when he comes back, he is changed and has no memory of what happened, but he starts to hear the voice of someone telling him to do things. And wow, this book gripped me in. I just devoured it in a couple of days despite how long it was, and I just adored it. I have said before that I don't like long horror fiction, and I have to change that because now I understand why people love horror epics so much, and I'm eager to check out more of that subgenre because this story was just so good that I appreciated having as much time as I did with the characters. It was epic in nature and exciting, and there were so many character perspectives. And what I liked so much is that this book to me read like a puzzle because you get different ideas and different characters and different clues along the way, and you know that they mean things, but you don't know what. But as the story goes on, they start to come together, the characters start to meet and intersect, and it just worked on so many levels. I have said before that there were parts towards the end where they referenced things that were mentioned at the beginning but didn't seem important but suddenly were, and I love that. I've mentioned in my review that this ending was a bit of a letdown, and I definitely don't think this book is perfect, but I just got so much out of the reading experience that I can't help but put it in my #1 spot. Is it going to be for everyone? Probably not. That is why this is my list of my favorite books of 2019 when it comes to thrillers and horror. This list is definitely subjective rather than objective, but that's how reading goes. But in terms of new releases, this one hit it out of the park and I just adored it. So cannot recommend this one enough. If you are someone who has watched my review and are interested in checking out, try it for yourself. Just keep in mind that it may not be for everyone, but I still want everyone to try it and see if they love it as much as I do. So that is it for this video. I would love to know down below, did I surprise you with any of the books I mentioned here? Or perhaps were you expecting a book to show up that didn't make the list? I read a lot of new releases this year, especially in terms of horror. So I feel like I have a pretty good vibe on the books that at least worked for me. Again, this is very much a personal list and you can totally disagree. On that note, I would love to hear which 2019 thriller or horror books were your favorite so I can hopefully check them out next year if I haven't read them yet. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will talk to you soon in those next 2 videos talking about science fiction fantasy and then finishing off with backlist horror. I have some great books to talk about, so I will see you again soon. Thanks, Kay. Bye-bye.